Duker, John Deal, and Jay Kanzler. Okay, so we have the Shaw shooting where Vonderitt Myers was, the police said that he had a gun and that shots were fired, and ballistics came back, and there was gun residue on one hand of Vonderitt Myers, much more heavily than the other hands, which lends yourself to believe that he was the one shooting the gun. There was 5 to 7 shots. There was one bullet left in the chamber, and there was a bullet behind the police officer that they couldn't tie to the gun. However, it was not from the police officer's gun. Much more information about this shooting. The question is, for all of you, why is it that we know much more about this shooting and we know so much less about the Michael Brown shooting?
I mean, I think, one, it has to do with, the police chief in St. Louis City decided that they wanted to disclose more information. I think some people believe that if you have a lot of witnesses, and that's where I do think that the Michael Brown case is different, because there were a significant number of witnesses, and it's going to be obviously dependent on eyewitness testimony. So keeping the witnesses from talking to each other and developing a narrative before these people actually testify or say their story to police is not a bad thing to do, because you want to make sure that, again, they're not hearing witness testimony and then tailoring their own testimony, whether consciously or unconscious, not even in an invidious way. But so I think that's one concern too. And I think that this is new. I mean, we've had how many homicides in the city of St. Louis, and only the last two, well, the Kwame Powell shooting and this shooting, were there these initial disclosures.
Kwame Powell was the guy with the knife.
Yes,
right.
Yes, and the mentally ill man. I mean, and we still haven't heard a lot about that, by the way.
Well, I don't understand why that hasn't caused more controversy. We have a video of that. We don't have video of this other one.
So I do think that they're somewhat different. Now, I think what's been interesting, though, is now you're hearing, some people in the press and even maybe some of the protester crowd indicating that the shooting Vonderitt Myers is very similar to Michael Brown. And I think there's a lot of dispute as to whether those two really are similar cases. And one was armed, one wasn't armed, but I think
one was shooting at a police officer.
Correct.
One was not.
Or maybe grabbed a police officer's gun. And
right. Which could have happened.
Right.
But so I think that to me is a very interesting twist. Is that, well, this is about racial profiling. So it, the fact that he shot at the police officer first.
But who's making the call here? Is it Sam Dotson decides to release this information? How come Balmer isn't deciding to release the information? How come Jackson's not releasing the information?
Situation.
How come Jennifer Joyce isn't the one saying don't release that information?
Police departments. I think one issue too is that when you have the Ferguson turning it over to the county, that's a little bit different.
Timelines are important here, and I think if you look at those two shootings and just go a timeline from when it started and run a timeline out 4 hours later, 3.5 hours later. But so the one in the city was a week or so ago. 3.5 hours later, everyone kind of knew what the facts were. 3.5 hours later, in the Michael Brown situation, the body was still laying in the street, and nobody was in charge. I remember I heard about the Michael Brown shooting when I was out of town on business, and I got a tweet about this body lying in the street. And what was going on? It appeared no one was in charge, and the first impression you have is, something's not right here, something's not going on. So the entire narrative on that built before anybody took charge and before anybody got any facts out. And I think that's just very critical in crisis management or in public safety matters, is to get out clear, concise information quickly but accurately, and give the process time to work as to the disputed facts.
I think a lot of it has to do with also who was in charge. With Michael Brown, you have a police department
that isn't very experienced,
incapable of really doing what what needed to be done in a crisis like this. Not just a murder; any murder is a crisis, but this one had all kinds of other factors surrounding it. So, like you said, no one. So they call, and I think the report is they called St. Louis County to have them come over and take over the investigation.
Which in and of itself takes a lot of time to get a whole different department out there.
Plus, there were people down in South County dealing with that person who robbed the hospital looking for drugs. There was another issue. But ultimately, though, what happens, heaven forbid, because at some point it's going to happen where a policeman does shoot somebody and it is wrong, or or there's a murder or something, and people want information instantaneously. I understand you want information instantaneously, but you are trampling on people's rights by releasing information, one, two, or both rights while you go forward with this.
And that's the challenge.
There's the ability to release information. And again, you said, why did the information come out? In the city shootings, you have Sam Dotson, you have someone in charge, you have an agency that's used to handling with these things, and they are able to process it. Sam Dotson isn't up there by himself. He has people behind him that are preparing information, gathering it, preparing statements for him, and then he gets out and says it. Poor Mayor Jackson, kind of wandered out there and just took a beat down from the press because he was ill prepared. That's a lot of what happened here. The second thing is, yes, people want information, and it should be. And those that are now saying, well, we shouldn't be putting out the information, what they're saying is we shouldn't be putting out the information that I don't like until it's all done and I can spin it the way I want it. There's a fine line. There is public information, autopsy reports, how many times they were shot.
Toxicology, gun residue.
Those kind
ballistics.
Of reports, when they come out, you can release them.
Right.
That's information that can go out. I don't think you then start releasing witness interviews. You don't start releasing some of that other information. That all goes to the investigation that can be compromised if it comes out.
Yeah. And you had another situation, too, that I think is different. Is, for example, if you had released the autopsy report quickly, you had witnesses at the Michael Brown shooting who were going to the press, who were doing national interviews. And so, the idea that you would put out physical evidence that could tailor their story, that is a challenge. And so, the Kwame Powell shooting was on videotape, so there's really no way to sort of, eyewitness testimony is what it is, but they have a tape. In the Vonderitt Myers shooting, there weren't, 20 witnesses. There weren't 30 witnesses. It just wasn't as complicated. And I think that, again, I think the Ferguson Police Department was likely very unequipped for this. And so they had a public safety situation developing around them while they were trying to hand this over. It was an aligning of garbage.
I think you make a good point. Sometimes it's easier to come in and be the second or third person that it happens to. So don't think that over the past
the city hasn't always done it
3 or 4 or 5 weeks that every police department in the state hasn't gone through its protocols saying how are we handling something like this.
Well, and Lisa Zigman from Channel 5 got to put a camera in front of Jamila Nasheed, and she's now complaining that why are you releasing some of the information? You should wait until it's all out. So depending on whose goose is getting cooked, she wants now the information to be withheld on that case, but she wants the information on the Michael Brown case to be released.
So
would she if it was really bad information? I think that's what they want is something to argue about. What they want is something to protest about.
Right.
And what the media wants, the national media there wants is to keep a story going.
So it's not about that. They don't like when bad information comes out. That's her complaint. I think it's incredibly... to say she was talking out of both sides of her mouth is putting it mildly.
Well, and then I think people forget that there was information that was released with the Michael Brown case. That was that video of the store video of him robbing the store moments before he was shot. That was
a
released.
timing issue.
That was a timing issue.
It was just that it was released in the same...
Right, I understand that, but they did release that information, though.
Right, and if you look at the Missouri Sunshine Law, it tells you that even though investigative reports are closed, and they should be, that incident reports are open, and what constitutes an incident report are just the general facts and circumstances that gave rise sort of to the investigation. So there's a little wiggle room in there, but... it is contemplated in Missouri law that law enforcement would at least give a general description. It doesn't prevent them. They can be closed. They don't have to be closed, those other records. But it does give, the law enforcement at least some leeway to say, okay, we'll give you general facts, and that can be enough. So given sort of what has happened in these various shootings, it isn't crazy that law enforcement would say, hey, we want to be reticent about what we send out until we know the facts. It's easy to be the Monday morning quarterback on all of this. But that line is always very fine as to when you're disclosing too much and hurting a case, and when you're not disclosing enough to make people feel like they don't have transparency.
And most of that up in Ferguson happened in the first 72 hours. It was mishandled in the first 72 hours.
It was a
remember within
a line of errors.
30 hours, 36 hours, the Quick Trip was being burned down.
Right.
And so, again...
Well, that was actually he was shot on a Saturday and then Sunday night. So
Right.
24, 25, 26 hours later.
So, again, things developed very quickly, and the situation changed dramatically in that 24 hours, whereas there have been protests in South St. Louis and some bricks thrown, but nothing of the magnitude, I think, for Ferguson, where they said, oh, this is getting out of hand very, very quickly. And again, ill-prepared to
and
handle that.
focusing on public safety. And all the while, the narrative is getting worse and worse and worse. And, that was a hard balance.
That's Jane Duker, John Deal, and Jay Kanzler. When we come back, Better Together released a study of the 21 municipalities that 20% or more of their revenue comes from fees. Of the 21%, 20 are from North County. We'll come back and discuss that coming up here in just a minute on the board meeting. Let me tell you this, because appliance